Hey guys, tonight we begin with why nights feel more honest. Those quiet experiences the mind creates when the day finally lets go. Before you get comfortable, if calm, thoughtful videos like this help you unwind, you can gently like the video or subscribe, only if it feels right. And if you'd like, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, let the room soften, and slowly drift with me through the quiet psychology of why nights feel more honest. There's something ancient about the way the world changes when daylight fades. The air itself seems to settle, as though gravity has grown just a little gentler, pulling the noise downward into the earth. Streets that hummed with voices fall into a rhythm of distant hums and faraway engines. The sky, no longer bright and demanding, becomes a soft canvas of deep blues and grays, then eventually black, a color that asks nothing of you. And in this transformation, something inside you begins to shift as well. The mind, which spent hours navigating the brightness and busyness of the day, finally exhales. It is not that the night brings new thoughts, but rather that it creates the conditions for old ones to surface, unguarded and unfiltered. This is the quiet magic of nighttime, a psychological environment where honesty feels less like a choice and more like an inevitability. When the world slows down, your brain follows. During daylight hours, your senses are in constant conversation with the environment. Light pours through your eyes, activating neural pathways that keep you alert, focused, and ready to respond. Sounds demand attention, voices, traffic, the hum of daily life, all of it creating a sensory load that your prefrontal cortex works tirelessly to manage. But as evening arrives, that load begins to lift. The absence of bright light means less stimulation to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the small cluster of cells in your hypothalamus that governs your circadian rhythm. With less external input, your brain no longer needs to allocate so much energy toward processing the outside world. Instead, it turns inward, like a traveler finally sitting down after a long journey. This inward turn is not a retreat, it is a homecoming. The psychology of nighttime begins with this simple truth: fewer distractions mean clearer thoughts. When the environment grows quiet, the mind is no longer competing with the noise of the world. Thoughts that were crowded out during the day now have space to breathe. Feelings that were too faint to notice beneath the chatter of meetings, conversations, and tasks now rise to the surface like stars appearing in a darkening sky. This is not imagination, it is cognitive science. Studies on attentional load show that when external stimuli decrease, internal awareness increases. The brain, no longer scanning for threats or opportunities, settles into a mode of reflection. And in that reflection, honesty becomes easier. There is no audience to perform for, no agenda to maintain. Just you, your thoughts, and the soft hum of the night. As the hours deepen, the world outside your window becomes a study in stillness. Streetlights glow like small moons, casting pale circles on empty sidewalks. The rustle of leaves in a breeze feels louder than it did at noon, not because the wind has changed, but because there is nothing else to hear. This sensory simplicity creates a kind of psychological clarity. Your mind, which spent the day prioritizing urgency and efficiency, now has permission to wander. And in that wandering, something honest begins to emerge, a thought you hadn't allowed yourself to think, a feeling you hadn't had time to feel. The night does not create these truths, it simply makes space for them. And in that space, the mind finds a rare kind of freedom. The quietness of night is not just external, it is internal as well. As your environment softens, so too does the rigid structure of your waking mind. The part of you that plans, judges, and filters begins to relax. And in that relaxation, a deeper, more honest version of yourself begins to speak. This is not weakness. This is the brain doing what it was designed to do: process the day, integrate experiences, and prepare for rest. But in that preparation, something beautiful happens. The walls you built around certain thoughts begin to lower. The defenses you maintained begin to soften. And the honesty you've been holding at arm's length finally draws near. As we drift deeper into the psychology of nighttime, we arrive at a place where the brain itself begins to change. Not in structure, but in function. During the day, your mind operates with a kind of vigilance, a readiness to respond, to evaluate, to engage. But as the sun sets and the hours stretch into evening, that vigilance begins to fade. The prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making, impulse control, and social awareness, starts to quiet. Not because it is broken, but because it is tired. And in that tiredness, a different part of you begins to speak. This is the phenomenon known as disinhibition, a state in which the brain's filtering mechanisms relax, allowing thoughts and feelings that were previously suppressed to rise into awareness. It is why late-night conversations feel more intimate than lunchtime chats. It is why journaling before bed often reveals truths that elude you during the day. It is why, in the dim glow of a bedside lamp, you might find yourself thinking thoughts you would never allow in the brightness of morning. The night does not make you more emotional, it makes you more honest. And that honesty feels profound because, for once, you are not editing yourself. Neuroscientists have studied this phenomenon for decades, observing how the brain's activity shifts as the day progresses. During waking hours, the default mode network, the brain's introspective system, is often suppressed in favor of task-positive networks that focus on external goals. But as night falls and external demands decrease, the default mode network becomes more active. This network is responsible for self-referential thinking, memory consolidation, and emotional processing. It is the part of the brain that wonders, reflects, and feels. And at night, it has the stage to itself. This shift is not abrupt. It unfolds slowly, like the transition from dusk to darkness. At first, you might notice only a subtle change, a loosening of tension in your shoulders, a softening of your gaze. But as the hours deepen, the change becomes more pronounced. Thoughts that felt distant during the day now feel close. Emotions that were muted now feel vivid. Memories that were filed away now resurface with surprising clarity. This is not randomness, it is the brain's natural rhythm. And in that rhythm, honesty is not forced. It simply arrives. The beauty of this process is that it requires no effort. You do not need to summon honesty, you only need to create the conditions for it. And nighttime, with its quiet and stillness, creates those conditions effortlessly. The dimming of light, the fading of noise, the slowing of time, all of it works together to dismantle the defenses you built during the day. And in that dismantling, something real emerges. A thought, a feeling, a truth you've been carrying without realizing it. The night does not give you these truths, it simply allows you to notice them. And in that noticing, the world feels a little more honest. Far beneath that quiet surface, something chemical begins to stir. As darkness deepens, a small gland in the center of your brain, the pineal gland, ancient and mysterious, begins to release a hormone called melatonin. You might know melatonin as the sleep hormone, the substance that makes your eyelids heavy and your thoughts slow. But melatonin is more than a sedative. It is a messenger, a signal that tells your body the day is over and the night has begun. And in that message, something subtle happens. Your emotional defenses begin to soften. Melatonin does not act on a single system, it influences many. It crosses the blood-brain barrier with ease, binding to receptors in the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. In the hypothalamus, it regulates circadian rhythms, synchronizing your internal clock with the external world. In the amygdala, it modulates emotional responses, reducing the intensity of fear and anxiety. And in the prefrontal cortex, it dampens the brain's executive functions, loosening the grip of logic and control. Together, these effects create a state of gentle vulnerability, a state in which honesty feels less dangerous and more natural. Research into melatonin's psychological effects has revealed something fascinating. This hormone does not just prepare the body for sleep, it prepares the mind for truth. Studies have shown that melatonin reduces activity in the brain's threat detection systems, making people feel safer and more open. It also enhances activity in areas associated with introspection and emotional processing, creating a mental environment where hidden feelings can emerge without triggering alarm. In essence, melatonin acts like a quiet truth serum, not by forcing honesty, but by removing the barriers that prevent it. This is why late-night thoughts often feel more authentic than daytime thoughts. During the day, your brain is flooded with cortisol and other stress hormones that keep you alert and guarded. But at night, melatonin takes over, shifting your neurochemistry toward calmness and openness. The thoughts that seemed too vulnerable to acknowledge during the day now feel safe to explore. The feelings that seemed too complicated to express now feel simple and clear. This is not a loss of rationality, it is a gain of emotional access. And in that access, honesty flourishes. The release of melatonin is not instantaneous. It begins gradually as the light around you dims. Your eyes detect the absence of blue light, the wavelength most CL, closely associated with daylight, and send signals to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This small cluster of neurons then communicates with the pineal gland, which begins to synthesize and release melatonin into your bloodstream. Within an hour or two, melatonin levels rise significantly, reaching their peak in the deepest hours of the night. And as those levels rise, the psychological effects deepen. Your thoughts become softer, your emotions become more fluid, and the barriers between your conscious and unconscious mind begin to blur. This blurring is not confusion, it is clarity of a different kind. During the day, your mind operates with sharp boundaries, dividing thoughts into categories: acceptable and unacceptable, logical and illogical, safe and dangerous. But at night, those boundaries dissolve. Thoughts that belong in different categories suddenly coexist without conflict. Feelings that seemed contradictory during the day now feel like parts of a larger truth. This is the gift of melatonin. It allows the mind to relax its structure, creating space for complexity and nuance. And in that space, honesty becomes not only possible, but inevitable. The psychology of melatonin is a reminder that honesty is not just a matter of intention, it is also a matter of biology. You can want to be honest during the day, but if your neurochemistry is designed for vigilance and defense, honesty will feel like a risk. At night, when melatonin shifts your brain into a different mode, honesty feels less like a risk and more like a relief. This is why nighttime confessions feel so natural. This is why late-night conversations reveal so much. The night does not make you a different person. It simply allows you to be the person you already are, without the armor. And so, as melatonin flows through your bloodstream, as your thoughts grow softer and your emotions grow clearer, you begin to understand why nights feel more honest. It is not because the night changes the truth. It is because the night changes you gently, biochemically, inevitably, into someone who can finally hear it. In another corner of this ancient world, deep within the architecture of your brain, a subtle transformation is taking place. The prefrontal cortex, the part of you that plans, evaluates, and controls, has been working all day. It has made decisions, solved problems, navigated social dynamics, and kept your impulses in check. But now, as the hours stretch into evening, this tireless guardian begins to rest. Not because it chooses to, but because it must. The prefrontal cortex is among the most energy-hungry regions of the brain, consuming glucose and oxygen at a remarkable rate. And after a full day of vigilance, its resources are depleted. So it does what any overworked system must do: it slows down. And in that slowing, something honest begins to emerge. The prefrontal cortex sits just behind your forehead, a relatively recent addition to the human brain in evolutionary terms. It is the seat of executive function, the part of you that thinks about thinking, that weighs consequences before acting, that maintains your social mask. During the day, this region works overtime to keep you appropriate, composed, and strategic. It filters your words before you speak them, modulates your emotions before you express them, and evaluates your thoughts before you believe them. In essence, it is the editor of your inner life, ensuring that what emerges into the world aligns with your goals and values. But at night, the editor takes a break. Neuroscientists have observed this phenomenon using functional MRI scans, which show how blood flow, and therefore neural activity, shifts throughout the day. During waking hours, the prefrontal cortex glows brightly on these scans, a sign of intense activity. But as evening progresses, that glow begins to dim. The neurons in this region fire less frequently, their communication slows, and their influence over other brain areas weakens. This is not a malfunction. It is a natural consequence of circadian rhythms and metabolic fatigue. The prefrontal cortex, like every other part of your body, operates on a cycle. And at night, that cycle tilts toward rest. When the prefrontal cortex relaxes, other parts of the brain are freed from its oversight. The amygdala, which governs emotional responses, becomes less constrained. The hippocampus, which manages memory, begins to replay experiences without the prefrontal cortex's editorial input. The default mode network, which handles introspection and self-referential thought, gains more influence over your conscious experience. Together, these shifts create a mental state that feels less controlled and more authentic. Thoughts that were suppressed during the day now surface without resistance. Feelings that were dampened by logic now express themselves fully. This is not chaos, it is honesty unfiltered. This softening of the prefrontal guard explains many of the psychological phenomena associated with nighttime. It is why late-night texts sometimes say things you regret in the morning. Your impulse control is reduced, and your emotional honesty is heightened. It is why creative ideas often arrive just before sleep. The rigid boundaries of logical thinking dissolve, allowing novel connections to form. It is why lying in bed at night can bring a wave of vulnerability. The defenses that protected you during the day are no longer active, leaving you exposed to your own inner truths. The night does not make you weaker. It simply reveals the strength it took to hold yourself together all day. There's a strange beauty in this vulnerability. During daylight hours, you navigate a world that rewards composure and penalizes emotional transparency. You learn to hide uncertainty behind confidence, to mask fear with action, to suppress sadness in favor of productivity. The prefrontal cortex becomes the enforcer of these strategies, ensuring that your external presentation remains consistent and acceptable. But at night, when that enforcement fades, you are left with the raw material of your inner life, unedited, unfiltered, undeniably real. And in that rawness, there is a kind of freedom. The freedom to feel what you actually feel. The freedom to think what you actually think. The freedom to be honest, even if only with yourself. Psychologists sometimes refer to this state as ego depletion, a condition in which the brain's self-control resources are exhausted. But the term feels too clinical for something so human. What you experience at night is not depletion, it is arrival. You arrive at a version of yourself that has been present all along, quietly waiting beneath the demands of the day. The prefrontal cortex does not hide this version of you, it simply keeps it in the background, while more urgent matters take precedence. But when urgency fades and the world grows still, that background version steps forward. And you recognize it immediately, because it is the most honest part of who you are. This process unfolds gradually, like the dimming of light through a curtain. At first, you might notice only small changes, a loosening of your habitual thought patterns, a willingness to entertain ideas you dismissed earlier. But as the night deepens, the changes become more pronounced. Your inner dialogue shifts from planning and problem-solving to wondering and reflecting. Your emotions, which were manageable during the day, now feel more immediate and intense. Your sense of self, which was defined by roles and responsibilities, now feels more fluid and expansive. This is the prefrontal cortex stepping aside, allowing the rest of your mind to speak. And what does the rest of your mind say? Often, it speaks truths you have been avoiding. The worry you minimized during your morning commute now asks to be acknowledged. The longing you dismissed as impractical now insists on being felt. The doubt you covered with optimism now reveals itself as something worth examining. These are not intrusions, they are invitations. Invitations to see yourself more clearly, to understand your needs more deeply, to honor the complexity of your inner world. The night, in its quiet wisdom, does not judge these truths. It simply holds space for them. And in that space, honesty becomes not only possible, but natural. The softening of the prefrontal guard is a reminder that honesty is not always a matter of courage. Sometimes it is a matter of exhaustion. You are honest at night not because you have chosen to be brave, but because you no longer have the energy to be guarded. And there is a strange grace in that. It means that honesty is always there, waiting beneath the surface, ready to emerge whenever the conditions allow. You do not need to force it. You only need to let go. And the night, with its gentle insistence, teaches you how. As we drift deeper into the folds of evening, we encounter a landscape that exists not in space, but in perception. Darkness is not merely the absence of light, it is a psychological environment, a canvas upon which the mind projects its hidden thoughts. When the world outside fades into shadow, the world inside comes alive. Thoughts that were barely visible in daylight now glow with a strange clarity. Feelings that were submerged beneath the noise of daily life now rise to the surface like ancient stones revealed by a receding tide. This is the paradox of darkness. In losing the ability to see the external world clearly, you gain the ability to see your internal world more vividly. The human relationship with darkness is old and complicated. For most of our evolutionary history, nighttime was a period of heightened vulnerability. Predators hunted in the dark. Dangers lurked beyond the reach of firelight. The brain evolved to treat darkness with caution, to stay alert even as the body rested. But something unexpected happened alongside this vigilance. Darkness also became a space of introspection, with no external stimuli to focus on. Our ancestors turned inward. They told stories, processed emotions, and reflected on the day. Darkness, which could have been only a threat, also became a refuge, a place where the mind could wander without the constraints of visibility. Modern neuroscience has begun to uncover why darkness has this effect. When light levels drop, the brain's visual cortex receives less input. This region, which normally dominates cognitive processing, quiets down. With less energy devoted to visual processing, other brain networks become more active. The default mode network, which governs self-referential thought, gains prominence. The salience network, which detects emotionally significant stimuli, becomes more sensitive. Together, these shifts create a mental state that is less focused on the external world and more attuned to the internal one. Darkness does not create thoughts, it amplifies them. It takes the quiet murmurs of your inner voice and turns them into something you can no longer ignore. This amplification explains why lying in bed at night can feel so different from lying in bed during the day. In daylight, even with your eyes closed, your brain knows the world is bright and active. It remains primed for engagement, ready to respond to the demands of the waking world. But in darkness, that priming fades. The brain interprets the absence of light as a signal that the external world is no longer relevant. And so it shifts its attention inward, toward the thoughts and feelings that have been accumulating throughout the day. This inward shift is not a choice, it is a reflex, as automatic as breathing. And in that reflex, honesty finds its opening. Darkness also changes the way you experience time. During the day, time feels linear and urgent, a series of tasks to complete, deadlines to meet, moments to seize. But at night, time becomes more fluid. Minutes stretch into something longer, less defined. The future feels distant, the past feels close, and the present feels expansive. This temporal softening is partly due to reduced sensory input. Without the constant stream of sights and sounds that mark the passage of time, your brain loses its usual reference points. But it is also due to melatonin, which alters the brain's perception of duration. Under the influence of melatonin, time does not disappear. It dissolves into something less rigid, more dreamlike. And in that dissolution, thoughts that belong to the past and concerns about the future blend together in the present moment. The boundaries between what was, what is, and what might be become porous. And honesty, which thrives in ambiguity, flows freely through those porous boundaries. There's also a sensory quality to darkness that invites honesty. When you cannot see, your other senses sharpen. You become more aware of the sound of your own breathing, the weight of your body against the mattress, the subtle temperature shifts in the room. This heightened bodily awareness brings you into the present moment with an intensity that daylight rarely provides. And in that present moment, you encounter yourself not as a collection of roles and responsibilities, but as a living, feeling being. This encounter is quiet, almost tender. It asks nothing of you except to notice. And in noticing, you become honest not through effort, but through presence. Psychologists have long recognized the link between reduced external stimuli and increased introspection. Studies on sensory deprivation have shown that when people are placed in environments with minimal light, sound, and tactile input, their minds turn inward dramatically. Thoughts become more vivid, emotions more intense, and self-awareness more acute. While sensory deprivation chambers represent an extreme version of this phenomenon, nighttime darkness creates a milder, more natural version of the same effect. You do not lose contact with reality. You simply lose contact with the distractions that usually occupy your attention. And in losing those distractions, you find something you did not know you were looking for: the truth of your own inner life. This inward drift is not always comfortable. Sometimes, the thoughts that rise in darkness are ones you would prefer to avoid: regrets from the past, anxieties about the future, doubts about yourself. The night does not discriminate. It brings all thoughts to the surface, not just the pleasant ones. But even in this discomfort, there is value. The thoughts that disturb you are often the ones that need your attention most. By allowing them to emerge, The night gives you the opportunity to process them, to understand them, to eventually release them. Honesty, after all, is not always gentle, but it is always necessary. And so, as darkness deepens and the world outside fades to black, you find yourself in a place that is both familiar and strange. Familiar, because it is the landscape of your own mind. Strange, because you so rarely have the chance to explore it with interruption. The night offers you this chance not as a gift, but as a natural consequence of its very nature. Darkness makes thoughts drift, and in that drifting, honesty becomes not a destination, but a journey. A slow, winding journey through the hidden corners of who you are. Far beneath that quiet surface, in the dim corridors of memory, something begins to stir. During the day, your memories are organized, filed away in neat categories, useful for decision-making, relevant for conversation, safely distant. But as evening arrives and melatonin begins its quiet work, the architecture of memory shifts. The boundaries that kept past experiences separate from present emotions begin to soften. Memories that were factual during the day become emotional at night. Details that seemed insignificant in daylight now glow with meaning. This is not a malfunction of memory, it is a transformation. And in that transformation, honesty finds fertile ground. The relationship between nighttime and memory is one of the most poignant aspects of sleep psychology. Researchers have discovered that the brain processes memories differently depending on the time of day. During waking hours, the hippocampus, the brain's primary memory center, works in tandem with the prefrontal cortex to retrieve memories in a controlled, contextual way. You remember what is useful, what is relevant, what fits the narrative you are constructing in the moment. But at night, when the prefrontal cortex relaxes, the hippocampus operates with more freedom. It retrieves memories based not on utility, but on emotional resonance. A song you heard in the afternoon might suddenly remind you of a summer 10 years ago. A phrase someone spoke might resurrect a conversation you thought you had forgotten. The night does not change what you remember, it changes how you remember. This shift toward emotional memory is not random. It serves an important psychological function: consolidation and integration. While you sleep, your brain replays the events of the day, weaving them into the larger fabric of your life story. But this process begins before sleep, in the twilight hours when you are awake, but no longer fully engaged with the world. During these hours, memories that need emotional processing rise to the surface. The argument you had in the morning returns, but now you feel the hurt beneath the anger. The success you celebrated at work returns, but now you notice the loneliness it did not erase. These are not new memories, they are deeper versions of memories you already have. And in their depth, they demand honesty. The vividness of nighttime memories is partly due to changes in neurotransmitter levels. As melatonin rises, serotonin, a neurotransmitter associated with mood regulation and sensory gating, begins to decrease. This decrease lowers the brain's sensory filters, allowing memories to be experienced more intensely. A memory that felt distant during the day now feels immediate. A face you had not thought about in years now appears in your mind with startling clarity. The past, which usually stays in the past, begins to bleed into the present. And in that blending, you are forced to confront feelings you thought you had resolved. There's something almost literary about the way nighttime memory works. It is as though the brain becomes a poet after dark, selecting not the most accurate details, but the most emotionally resonant ones. You remember not just what happened, but how it felt. Not just what was said, but what it meant. This poetic memory is not false, it is simply tuned to a different frequency. During the day, memory serves the needs of logic and action. At night, it serves the needs of meaning and understanding. And understanding, by its nature, requires honesty. You cannot understand your life if you are only remembering the facts. You must also remember the feelings. And the night, with its soft insistence, ensures that you do. This is why journaling before bed often reveals insights that elude you during the day. As you write, nighttime memory brings forward experiences you had forgotten or minimized. The interaction that seemed trivial at the time now reveals itself as significant. The emotion you suppressed in the moment now asks to be acknowledged. The pattern you did not see during the day now becomes obvious in the quiet of evening. Nighttime memory is not about accuracy, it is about truth. And truth, as the night reminds you, is often found not in what happened, but in how you felt about what happened. The emotional quality of nighttime memory also explains why late-night conversations can feel so intimate. When you share a memory after dark, you are not just recounting events, you are revealing how those events shaped you. The filters that would normally protect you from vulnerability are less active. The prefrontal cortex, which might edit your story during the day to make you seem more composed or more rational, is now resting. What a meh. Arges is a rawer, more honest version of your past. And the person listening hears not just your story, but your truth. Psychologists have long noted that memory is not a static recording. It is a dynamic reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you rebuild it from fragments, influenced by your current emotional state and cognitive focus. At night, when your emotional centers are more active and your logical filters are less engaged, this reconstruction process is weighted toward feeling rather than fact. This is why the same memory can feel different at midnight than it did at noon. It is not that the memory has changed, it is that you have changed. The night has shifted your perspective, allowing you to see the memory from an angle that daylight obscures. There is also a phenomenon known as memory reconsolidation, which occurs when a retrieved memory becomes temporarily malleable before being stored again. Nighttime is an ideal period for this process because the brain is in a state of openness. Memories that caused pain during the day can be revisited at night with less defensiveness, allowing for emotional processing and eventual healing. This is not about rewriting history. It is about integrating history into a coherent sense of self. And integration requires honesty. You must acknowledge what hurt, what mattered, what you carried longer than you realized. As the hours deepen and memory continues its quiet work, you may find yourself drifting through scenes from your past like a traveler through a dimly lit museum. Each memory is a room filled with objects that once seemed ordinary but now glow with significance. A childhood kitchen, a friend's laugh, a moment of choice. The night does not judge these memories. It simply presents them, one after another, inviting you to see them not as they were, but as they are, part of the ongoing story of who you are becoming. And in that story, honesty is not optional. It is the thread that holds everything together. And so the story continues, gently unfolding into a realm where silence is not empty, but full. The nighttime quiet that descends after the world has stopped moving is a different kind of silence than the brief pauses between daytime activities. It is deeper, more complete, more revealing. During the day, silence is rare and often uncomfortable, a gap to be filled with words, music, or noise. But at night, silence becomes the default state. And in that default state, something unexpected happens. The quiet outside allows the quiet inside to finally be heard. The psychology of silence is more complex than it first appears. Neuroscientists have discovered that the absence of sound does not create an absence of brain activity. Instead, it shifts the brain's focus from external processing to internal processing. When there is no auditory input to analyze, The auditory cortex does not simply shut down, it begins to amplify internal signals. The sound of your own thoughts becomes louder. The rhythm of your own emotions becomes more noticeable. The subtle undercurrents of feeling that were drowned out by the noise of the day now rise to the surface. Silence, in other words, is not the absence of communication. It is the beginning of a different kind of conversation. A conversation with yourself. This inward conversation is where honesty thrives. During the day, your attention is constantly pulled outward by obligations, interactions, and stimuli. You respond to emails, navigate traffic, engage in conversations, manage tasks. Each of these activities requires you to focus on something external, leaving little bandwidth for self-reflection. But at night, when the external demands cease, your attention has nowhere to go but inward. And what it finds there is often surprising. Feelings you did not know you were carrying. Thoughts you did not realize you were thinking. Truths you have been avoiding without even knowing it. Research on mindfulness and meditation has shown that silence has a profound effect on self-awareness. When people are placed in quiet environments and asked to simply observe their thoughts, they report a dramatic increase in insight and clarity. The noise of daily life acts as a kind of cognitive static, making it difficult to hear the signal of your true feelings. But when that static is removed, the signal becomes clear. You do not need to search for honesty. It simply emerges in the absence of distraction. And nighttime, with its natural silence, creates the conditions for this emergence effortlessly. There is also a neurological reason why silence enhances emotional awareness. The brain's default mode network, which becomes more active during periods of rest and introspection, is particularly sensitive to quiet environments. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that when people are exposed to silence, activity in the default mode network increases significantly. This network is responsible for self-referential thinking, pondering your WN experiences, feelings, and identity. In silence, this network flourishes. It connects disparate thoughts, integrates memories with emotions, and generates insights that would be impossible in a noisy environment. The night does not give you new thoughts. It gives you the silence needed to hear the thoughts you already have. This is why lying awake at night can feel so emotionally intense. With no external noise to focus on, your mind turns to the internal noise, the unresolved worries, the unspoken fears, the unacknowledged longings. These are not intrusions, they are signals from your subconscious, asking for attention. During the day, you can ignore these signals because there are so many other things demanding your focus. But at night, in the silence, there is nothing to distract you from them. They rise, insistent and undeniable, until you finally listen. And in listening, you become honest with yourself in a way that daylight rarely allows. The silence of night also changes the way you experience your own voice. When you speak during the day, your words are immediately absorbed by the surrounding noise, traffic, conversation, the hum of activity. But at night, when you speak, your voice seems to carry further, to linger in the air. This acoustic quality creates a sense of weight and significance. Words spoken at night feel more important, more revealing, more honest. This is partly a physical phenomenon. Sound travels differently in quiet environments. But it is also a psychological one. The silence makes you more aware of what you are saying, more careful with your words, more willing to speak truths that would feel too vulnerable in the brightness of day. Psychologists have noted that silence can be both comforting and confronting. For some, the quiet of night is a refuge, a chance to finally be alone with their thoughts without interruption. For others, it is a challenge, a space where hidden emotions demand to be felt. Both experiences are valid, and both are forms of honesty. The comfort comes from finally having space to process your day, to reflect on your experiences, to integrate your feelings. The confrontation comes from encountering parts of yourself you have been avoiding, the sadness you covered with busyness, the anger you dismissed as irrational, the longing you deemed impractical. The night does not choose which version you will experience. It simply holds the silence and lets you fill it with whatever is true. There is also a cultural dimension to nighttime silence. In many traditions, nighttime is considered a sacred period, a time for prayer, meditation, and contemplation. This is not coincidental. Cultures around the world have recognized that the quiet of night creates ideal conditions for spiritual and emotional depth. Without the distractions of daily life, the mind can turn to larger questions, questions about meaning, purpose, and connection. These questions do not have easy answers, but they do have honest ones. And honesty, in the realm of the spirit, requires silence. It requires a willingness to sit with uncertainty, to listen without needing to respond, to feel without needing to act. As the silence deepens, you may notice a strange phenomenon. The absence of sound begins to feel like a presence. The quiet is not empty, it is full of possibility, full of unspoken truths, full of the subtle vibrations of your own inner life. This is the gift of nighttime silence. It does not tell you what to think or how to feel. It simply creates space for whatever is already there to emerge. And in that space, honesty is not something you achieve, it is something you allow. You allow yourself to hear the thoughts you have been thinking beneath the noise. You allow yourself to feel the feelings you have been holding at bay. You allow yourself to be, without performance or pretense, exactly who you are. And the night, in its silent wisdom, asks nothing more of you than that. In the hours when the world seems emptiest, another truth emerges, one that is both uncomfortable and clarifying. Loneliness becomes more noticeable at night, not because you are necessarily more alone, but because the distractions that usually obscure loneliness fade away. During the day, you can stay busy. You can fill the hours with tasks, interactions, and movement. But at night, when activity ceases and stillness settles in, loneliness stops being an abstract concept and becomes a felt experience. And in that experience, something honest reveals itself. The difference between solitude and loneliness, between being alone and feeling alone. Loneliness is one of the most universally human emotions, yet it is also one of the most misunderstood. It is not simply the absence of other people, it is the absence of meaningful connection. You can feel lonely in a crowded room if no one truly sees you. You can feel connected while alone if you carry the warmth of others in your memory. But at night, the subtleties of loneliness become harder to ignore. The quiet amplifies the ache of disconnection. The darkness makes you more aware of the distance between yourself and the people you care about. And the stillness gives you no escape from the realization that, in the end, you are always somewhat alone inside your own mind. Neuroscientists have studied the brain's response to loneliness and discovered that it activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, which processes social pain, lights up when people feel excluded or disconnected. This is not metaphor, it is biology. Loneliness hurts. And at night, when the brain's pain-modulating systems are less active, that hurt feels sharper. The brain, which spent the day minimizing discomfort in order to function, now allows the full weight of loneliness to be felt. This is not cruelty, it is honesty. The night does not create loneliness. It simply stops pretending it is not there. But here is where the psychology of nighttime loneliness becomes interesting. Feeling lonely at night can also lead to clarity. When you stop avoiding the feeling and allow yourself to sit with it, you begin to understand its contours. What kind of connection are you missing? What needs are going unmet? What parts of yourself are you longing to share with someone who truly understands? These questions are difficult, but they are also valuable. They point you toward what matters. And mattering, by definition, is honest. Research on solitude has shown that being alone is not inherently negative. It can be restorative, creative, and deeply meaningful. But the experience of solitude depends on how you relate to it. If you spend the night resisting loneliness, fighting the feeling, distracting yourself from it, it becomes a source of suffering. But if you approach it with curiosity and compassion, it becomes a source of insight. The night offers you this choice. It does not force loneliness upon you. It simply reveals the loneliness that was already there, hidden beneath the noise of the day. And in revealing it, it gives you the chance to understand it. There's also a paradox in nighttime loneliness. It can make you feel more connected to others, even in their absence. When you lie awake at night, aware of your own solitude, you become aware that countless others are experiencing the same thing. Across the world, people are lying in the dark, feeling the same ache, asking the same questions, longing for the same connection. This shared experience of loneliness creates a strange kind of kinship. You are alone, yes, but you are not alone in being alone. And that realization, small as it is, can be a source of comfort. Psychologists call this existential aloneness, the recognition that each person is fundamentally separate, enclosed within the boundaries of their own consciousness. It is a truth that philosophy has grappled with for centuries, but it is also a truth that most people only confront at night, when the usual reassurances of social life are absent. During the day, you can believe that you are fully known, fully understood, fully connected. But at night, you are reminded that there is always a gap, a space between your inner experience and what you can communicate to others. This gap is not a failure. It is simply the nature of being human. And acknowledging it, rather than denying it, is a form of honesty. The emotional processing that occurs at night often involves confronting unmet needs for connection. Maybe you spent the day surrounded by people, but never felt truly seen. Maybe you had conversations that were functional but not meaningful. Maybe you performed the role others expected of you, but never expressed who you actually are. At night, these unmet needs surface. The loneliness you feel is not just about being alone, it is about being unknown. And that kind of loneliness, while painful, is also clarifying. It tells you what you need. It tells you what you are missing. And in telling you, it gives you the information necessary to seek something better. There's also a developmental aspect to nighttime loneliness. Children often experience bedtime as a moment of separation anxiety, a fear that once alone in the dark, they will be forgotten or abandoned. While most adults outgrow this fear, traces of it remain. The vulnerability of nighttime can reactivate old fears of being left behind, of not mattering, of being alone in a way that feels unbearable. But confronting these fears at night, in the safety of your own room, is a way of processing them. The night becomes a container for emotions that are too big or too frightening to face during the day. And in that container, you can feel them without being overwhelmed. As the night deepens and loneliness makes itself known, you may find yourself reaching for your phone, scrolling through messages, seeking some small proof that you are connected to the world. This is not weakness. It is a natural response to a natural feeling. There is also value in resisting that impulse, in sitting with the loneliness without immediately trying to escape it. Because in that sitting, you discover something important. You can survive the feeling. You can be alone and still be whole. And that discovery, quiet as it is a form of strength. The night does not take away loneliness. It teaches you how to hold it. And in holding it, you become more honest about what it means to be human. Deep within the machinery of your body, a clock is ticking. Not a clock you can see or hear, but one that governs nearly every aspect of your existence. A circadian rhythm, ancient and precise, calibrated over millions of years to the rising and setting of the sun. This internal timekeeper does more than regulate sleep. It influences mood, energy, hormone levels, and even the way you perceive the world. And at night, as this clock reaches the part of its cycle associated with rest and recovery, it does something subtle but profound. It opens the door to emotional vulnerability. The science of circadian rhythms is a study of cycles within cycles. Every cell in your body contains molecular clocks, genes that turn on and off in roughly 24-hour patterns. These cellular clocks are synchronized by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master clock, which takes its cues from light exposure. When light hits your eyes, it signals that it is daytime, prompting the release of cortisol and other hormones that promote alertness. When darkness falls, the master clock shifts, triggering the release of melatonin and initiating a cascade of changes that prepare your body for sleep. But sleep is not the only thing this shift affects. It also changes how you feel. Research has shown that circadian rhythms influence emotional regulation in significant ways. During the day, when cortisol levels are high, the brain is better equipped to manage stress and maintain a positive mood. Cortisol, often maligned as the stress hormone, actually plays an important role in helping you cope with challenges. It sharpens focus, increases energy, and enhances the brain's ability to suppress negative emotions. But as evening approaches and cortisol levels decline, this emotional armor begins to dissolve. The brain's capacity to regulate negative emotions weakens. Sadness feels sadder. Anxiety feels more pressing. Doubts feel more credible. This is not a flaw in the system, it is a feature. The night, by reducing cortisol, creates a window in which suppressed emotions can finally be processed. Melatonin, the hormone that rises as cortisol falls, contributes to this emotional shift in its own way. While melatonin is primarily known for promoting sleep, it also affects mood and emotional processing. Studies have found that melatonin increases activity in brain regions associated with introspection and decreases activity in regions associated with external focus. The result is a mental state that is more inward-looking, more reflective, and more emotionally open. You are not just tired at night, you are psychologically different. And that difference makes honesty feel less dangerous and more natural. Circadian rhythms also influence the balance of neurotransmitters in the brain. Serotonin, which stabilizes mood and promotes feelings of well-being, follows a daily pattern, with levels typically higher during the day and lower at night. Dopamine, which drives motivation and reward-seeking behavior, also declines in the evening. These neurochemical shifts create a state in which the brain is less focused on pursuing goals and more focused on reflecting on experiences. The drive to act is replaced by the need to process. And processing, by its nature, requires honesty. You cannot integrate your experiences if you are still pretending they did not affect you. This circadian modulation of emotion explains why late-night conversations often feel more intimate and revealing than daytime ones. It is not just that the environment is quieter or that you are more tired. It is that your brain is biochemically primed for emotional openness. The neurotransmitter systems that would normally keep your emotions in check are less active. The hormonal systems that would normally prioritize action over reflection have shifted into a different mode. You are, in a very real sense, a different version of yourself at night, not because you have changed. but because your brain has cycled into a phase that prioritizes emotional truth over social performance. Chronobiology, the study of biological rhythms, has revealed that these cycles are not arbitrary, they serve adaptive functions. During the day, when humans historically faced threats and opportunities that required quick thinking and decisive action, the brain needed to be vigilant and controlled. But at night, when our ancestors gathered around fires and reflected on the day, the brain needed to be introspective and emotionally attuned. This is when social bonds were strengthened through storytelling and shared vulnerability. This is when individual experiences were integrated into collective memory. The circadian system, in other words, evolved to create a rhythm not just of sleep and wakefulness, but of action and reflection, of defense and openness, of performance and honesty. Understanding this rhythm can change the way you relate to your nighttime emotions. When sadness rises at night, it is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that your circadian system is doing what it is designed to do. When doubts surface before sleep, they are not intrusions. They are invitations to process experiences that you moved through too quickly during the day. The night is not sabotaging you. It is completing you. It is giving you the other half of the emotional cycle, the half that does not push forward but looks back, the half that does not strive but integrates, the half that does not perform but simply is. There is also evidence that disrupting circadian rhythms through shift work, jet lag, or irregular sleep schedules can impair emotional regulation and increase the risk of mood disorders. When the rhythm is thrown off, the brain loses its natural timing for emotional processing. Feelings that should surface at night, in a safe and quiet context, instead emerge at unpredictable times, often when you are least equipped to handle them. This is one reason why maintaining a regular sleep schedule is so important for mental health. It is not just about getting enough sleep. It is about preserving the rhythm that allows for emotional honesty. As the circadian cycle moves deeper into the night, approaching the hours when sleep becomes inevitable, the brain reaches its most vulnerable state. This is when the boundaries between waking and dreaming begin to blur, when thoughts become less linear and more associative, when the rational mind loosens its grip and the emotional mind takes over. This is the window of pre-sleep honesty, a state that many people experience as both unsettling and clarifying. It is unsettling because defenses are down and truths emerge without warning. It is clarifying because those truths, uncomfortable as they may be, are real. And the night, in its biochemical wisdom, ensures that you encounter them. Not to torment you, but to prepare you for rest, for healing, for the honesty that makes both possible. And so the hours continue their slow unfolding, leading us to a place where psychology and perception merge. There is a reason why darkness feels safer than daylight for certain kinds of truth. It is not just cultural or symbolic, it is structural, woven into the way the human mind relates to visibility and exposure. During the day, when everything is visible, you are aware of being seen. The brightness makes you conscious of your appearance, your expressions, your performance. But at night, when darkness obscures, that awareness fades. You are still present, but you are less observed, or at least, less visibly observed. And in that lessening, something inside you relaxes. The part of you that was performing for an invisible audience finally takes a break, and the part of you that was hiding finally feels safe enough to emerge. This sense of safety is not just psychological, it has roots in evolutionary biology. For early humans, darkness offered concealment from predators and rivals. It was a time when you could lower your guard at least slightly and attend to needs that daylight made dangerous, processing emotions, tending to relationships, reflecting on experiences. Over millennia, the human brain came to associate darkness not just with physical safety, but with emotional safety. Night became the time when vulnerability was less costly, when honesty was less risky, when the masks worn during the day could finally be removed. Modern psychology has explored this phenomenon through studies on self-disclosure. Researchers have found that people are more likely to reveal personal information in dimly lit environments than in brightly lit ones. The reduction in visibility creates what psychologists call perceived anonymity, a feeling that, even though you are not truly anonymous, you are less exposed. This perception lowers inhibitions and increases willingness to be honest. It is why confessionals are dim, why therapy offices often use soft lighting, why late-night conversations in parked cars feel so intimate. The darkness does not change who you are, it changes how safe you feel being who you are. There is also a neurological component to this sense of safety. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, is less reactive in low-light conditions, provided those conditions are associated with rest rather than threat. When you are in your own bed, in your own room, in the familiar darkness of home, the amygdala registers safety. This allows other parts of the brain, particularly those involved in emotional processing and self-reflection, to operate without the constant vigil. Ants that characterizes daytime cognition. The night creates a neurological environment where honesty is not just possible, but probable. The concept of psychological safety, a term popularized in organizational and therapeutic contexts, is deeply relevant to nighttime honesty. Psychological safety is the feeling that you can express yourself without fear of judgment, rejection, or harm. During the day, this safety is often conditional. It depends on who you are with, what roles you are playing, what consequences might follow. But at night, alone in the dark, psychological safety becomes unconditional. There is no audience to judge you, no consequences to navigate, just you, your thoughts, and the quiet permission to feel whatever you feel. This is why nighttime journaling, prayer, and self-reflection are so common across cultures. The night provides a sanctuary for honesty that daylight, with its demands and exposures, rarely offers. The metaphor of night as shelter is ancient and recurring. In literature, night is often portrayed as a refuge for outcasts, lovers, and seekers, those who cannot express themselves in the light of day. This is not romanticization, it is recognition of a psychological truth. Night shelters the parts of you that daylight makes vulnerable. It gives voice to thoughts that would be silenced in brighter, busier contexts. It allows emotions to breathe that would otherwise be suffocated by the expectations of waking life. And in this sheltering, it creates the conditions for a kind of honesty that is rare and precious. This sense of shelter also explains why bedtime rituals are so important for many people. The ritual of dimming lights, closing curtains, and settling into bed is not just about preparing the body for sleep. It is about signaling to the mind that it is now safe to be honest. The external environment mirrors the internal need for safety. And in that mirroring, the mind receives permission to lower its defenses, to acknowledge what it has been holding, to process what it has been avoiding. The night does not force this process. It simply makes space for it. And in that space, honesty unfolds naturally, like a flower that only blooms in the dark. There is also a spiritual dimension to this sense of safety. Many religious and contemplative traditions treat nighttime as sacred, a time for prayer, meditation, and communion with the divine or the deeper self. This sacredness arises from the recognition that night offers something daylight cannot, a space free from the distractions of the material world, where the soul can speak without interruption. Whether or not you frame it in spiritual terms, the psychological experience is the same. Night offers a sanctuary, And in that sanctuary, truth is not something you chase, it is something you allow. You allow yourself to feel what you have been holding back. You allow yourself to think what you have been afraid to consider. You allow yourself to be, without pretense, exactly who you are. And the night, in its infinite patience, holds that truth without judgment. As we drift deeper still, we arrive at a threshold, the liminal space between waking and sleeping, where the rules of consciousness begin to dissolve. This is the hypnagogic state, the dreamlike honesty that emerges just before sleep. Scientists have studied this state for decades, fascinated by its strange combination of clarity and surrealism. Thoughts become vivid but illogical. Emotions feel intense but unmoored from their usual triggers. The boundary between memory and imagination blurs. And in that blurring, a peculiar kind of truth emerges, one that is not filtered by logic or constrained by social norms. This is honesty in its rawest form, unguarded and unedited. The hypnagogic state occurs as the brain transitions from wakefulness to sleep. Neural activity shifts from the high-frequency beta waves of alert consciousness to the slower alpha and theta waves of drowsiness. During this transition, the prefrontal cortex, already tired from the day, becomes even less active. Meanwhile, the limbic system, which governs emotions, remains relatively engaged. The result is a mental state in which feelings are vivid, but reasoning is impaired, in which insights arise spontaneously, but often defy logical explanation. This is not a lesser form of consciousness. It is a different form, one that prioritizes emotional truth over factual accuracy. Psychologists have long recognized the creative and introspective potential of the hypnagogic state. Many artists, writers, and inventors have reported receiving inspiration during this twilight period. Salvador Dali famously used a technique he called slumber with a key, in which he would hold a key between his fingers as he drifted off to sleep. When he fell asleep, the key would drop, waking him just enough to capture the surreal images that arose in the hypnagogic state. Thomas Edison reportedly used a similar method with ball bearings. These figures understood intuitively what neuroscience has since confirmed. The pre-sleep mind has access to truths that the fully awake mind cannot reach. But the hypnagogic state is not just for artists. It is a nightly experience for everyone, a window of time in which the mind reveals things it has been holding back. Worries that seemed manageable during the day now feel urgent. Hopes that seemed foolish in daylight now feel possible. Regrets that were buried beneath busyness now rise with painful clarity. This is not the mind malfunctioning. It is the mind completing its daily work. The hypnagogic state is where integration happens, where the events of the day are processed emotionally and woven into the larger narrative of your life. And integration, by its nature, requires honesty. There is also a physiological reason why this state feels so emotionally potent. As the brain transitions towards sleep, the balance of neurotransmitters shifts dramatically. Serotonin and norepinephrine, which promote alertness and emotional control, decrease. Acetylcholine, which enhances memory and imagination, increases. This neurochemical cocktail creates a state in which memories feel more vivid, emotions feel more immediate, and thoughts feel more interconnected. The logical mind, which would normally evaluate and filter these thoughts, is too drowsy to intervene. So they simply flow, one into another, creating a stream of consciousness that is often more honest than anything you experience during waking hours. The insights that arise in the hypnagogic state can be startling in their clarity. You might suddenly understand why a relationship ended, or why a particular decision felt wrong, or what you truly want from your life. These insights do not arrive through deliberate analysis. They simply appear, fully formed, as though they were waiting for the moment when your defenses were too weak to resist them. This is the gift of the pre-sleep mind. It bypasses the gatekeepers of logic and propriety and goes straight to the truth. But the hypnagogic state is also ephemeral. The thoughts that feel so profound at midnight often fade by morning, lost in the transition to full sleep or forgotten upon waking. This is why many people keep notebooks by their beds, hoping to capture the fleeting insights before they disappear. And while not every pre-sleep thought is worth preserving, some are merely the random firings of a tired brain. The ones that carry emotional weight often contain real wisdom. They are the mind's way of telling you what matters, what needs attention, what you have been avoiding. And the night, in its generosity, gives you a chance to hear these truths before sleep erases them. There's also a poetic quality to the hypnagogic state that makes its honesty feel different from daytime introspection. Thoughts do not unfold in neat, linear sequences. They spiral, loop, and leap from one image to another. A memory from childhood might merge with a worry about the future. A face from the past might appear alongside a feeling from the present. This associative, dreamlike thinking is not confusion. It is the mind's way of finding connections that logic would dismiss. And in those connections, truth often reveals itself. Not the truth of facts, but the truth of meaning. Not the truth of what happened, but the truth of what it meant to you. As you lie in the dark, hovering on the edge of sleep, the world inside your mind becomes more real than the world outside your window. The thoughts and feelings that arise in this state are not bound by the rules of waking consciousness. They do not need to make sense. They do not need to be justified. They simply are. And in their unfiltered existence, they offer a kind of honesty that is rare and valuable. The hypnagogic state is where the masks fall completely, where the defenses dissolve entirely, where the truth you have been avoiding all day finally catches up to you. And the night, in its infinite patience, waits until you are too tired to resist it. Far beneath the surface of waking awareness, even deeper than the hypnagogic drift, the brain continues its work. This is the midnight hour when most of the world is asleep, but some minds remain awake, turning over thoughts like stones, examining memories, processing emotions that the day did not allow time for. This is not insomnia, at least not always. Sometimes it is simply the brain doing what it needs to do, emotional processing. And emotional processing, when it happens in the stillness of midnight, has a quality of tenderness that daylight rarely permits. The concept of emotional processing is central to psychological health. Throughout the day, you encounter experiences that evoke feelings, frustration at work, joy in a conversation, sadness at a memory, anxiety about the future. But most of these feelings are not fully processed in the moment. You do not have time to sit with frustration when there are tasks to complete. You can. Linger in sadness when there are people depending on you. So the feelings are set aside, filed away, to be dealt with later. And later, for many people, is the middle of the night. Neuroscience has revealed that the brain has a dedicated system for emotional processing, involving the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex working in concert. During waking hours, this system operates in real time, helping you respond to immediate emotional stimuli. But it also has a delayed processing mode, which activates during periods of rest and low cognitive load. This is when the brain revisits earlier experiences, extracting emotional meaning and integrating it into long-term memory. Nighttime, especially the deep quiet of midnight, is ideal for this work. With no new experiences demanding attention, the brain can finally attend to the emotional residue of the day. This is why lying awake at midnight often brings a flood of emotions. An argument from the morning returns, but now you feel the hurt more acutely. A success from the afternoon returns, but now you notice the emptiness it did not fill. A conversation from the evening returns, but now you understand the subtext you missed in the moment. These are not new emotions. They are the same emotions you felt earlier, now being processed more deeply. The night does not create emotional intensity. It reveals the intensity that was always there, waiting to be acknowledged. There is also a phenomenon psychologists call rumination, which often occurs at night. Rumination is the repetitive replaying of thoughts and events, usually with a negative or self-critical tone. While excessive rumination can be harmful, a certain amount of it is normal and even necessary. It is the mind's way of trying to make sense of experiences that felt confusing or distressing. The key difference between healthy processing and unhealthy rumination is whether the thoughts lead somewhere toward understanding, acceptance, or resolution, or whether they simply loop endlessly without progress. The night offers both possibilities. It can be a time of healing reflection or a time of anxious spinning. Which one you experience often depends on how you relate to the process. Midnight reflections are also deeply influenced by memory. The hippocampus, which stores and retrieves memories, is particularly active during rest periods. As you lie awake, memories surface not in chronological order, but in emotional order. The ones that carry the most unresolved feeling rise first. You might find yourself thinking about a friendship that ended years ago, or a decision you regretted but never fully examined, or a moment of kindness that you never properly appreciated. These memories are not random. They are the ones your brain has flagged as needing further processing. And the night, with its quiet and its safety, is when that processing can finally occur. There's a strange beauty in this midnight work. The world is asleep, but you are awake, tending to the inner landscape that daylight forces you to ignore. You are not wasting time, you are integrating your life. You are not overthinking, you are understanding. And even if the process is painful, even if the emotions that surface are difficult, there is value in allowing them to be felt. Emotions that are suppressed do not disappear, they accumulate. And eventually, they demand attention. The night offers you the chance to give them that attention on your own terms, in your own space, without the pressure of performance or the fear of judgment. Research on sleep and emotional health has shown that people who allow themselves time for nighttime reflection, whether through journaling, meditation, or simply lying quietly with their thoughts, tend to have better emotional regulation and greater psychological resilience. This is because they are not avoiding their inner life, they are engaging with it. They are not pushing emotions away, they are processing them. And processing, however uncomfortable in the moment, leads to integration. And integration leads to peace. As the midnight hours stretch on, the processing continues. Slowly, gently, the emotional weight of the day begins to lift, not because the problems have been solved, but because they have been acknowledged. Not because the pain has disappeared, but because it has been felt. The night does not promise resolution, it promises honesty. And honesty, in the realm of emotion, is the first step toward healing. You cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. You cannot release what you do not allow yourself to feel. And the night, in its infinite patience, gives you the space to do both. In another corner of this quiet world, beneath the layers of conscious thought, there exists a form of knowing that does not rely on logic or evidence. This is intuition, the subtle sense that something is true even when you cannot explain why. During the day, intuition is often drowned out by the noise of rational thinking. You are taught to value facts, to justify your beliefs, to distrust feelings that cannot be proven. But at night, when the rational mind quiets, intuition speaks with a clarity that is impossible to ignore. And what it says is often more honest than anything logic can offer. Intuition is not magic. It is pattern recognition operating below the level of conscious awareness. Your brain processes far more information than you can consciously attend to. Throughout the day, it notices subtle cues, facial expressions, tone of voice, inconsistencies in stories, patterns in behavior, and integrates them into a sense of what is true. But this integration happens in the background, in neural networks that do not produce verbal thoughts. The result is a feeling, a hunch, a quiet sense of knowing. And that sense becomes much clearer at night when the verbal, analytical mind is less dominant. Neuroscientists have identified the brain regions involved in intuitive processing, including the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex. These areas monitor internal states and detect patterns in complex information. They operate largely outside conscious awareness, which is why intuitive insights often feel like they come from nowhere. But they do not come from nowhere. They come from deep processing, from the brain's ability to synthesize information in ways that conscious thought cannot. And at night, when external inputs are minimal and internal processing is maximal, intuitive insights have the space to surface. This is why people often say they need to sleep on important decisions. It is not just a figure of speech. It is a recognition that the night offers a different kind of wisdom. During sleep, the brain continues to process information, forming new connections and integrating disparate pieces of knowledge. But even before sleep, in the quiet hours of evening, intuition begins to assert itself. You might find yourself suddenly certain about a decision you have been agonizing over. Not because new information has arrived, but because your brain has finally had the chance to process the information you already have. The night does not give you new answers. It reveals the answers you already possessed. There's also an emotional component to intuition. Feelings are not separate from knowing. They are a form of knowing. When something feels wrong, even if it looks right on paper, that feeling is often your brain's way of alerting you to information that your conscious mind has missed. At night, when emotional centers are more active and less constrained by logic, these feelings become harder to dismiss. A relationship that seemed fine during the day might feel subtly off at night. A job that looked good on paper might feel misaligned with your values. A plan that seemed rational might feel emotionally wrong. These nighttime intuitions are not irrational. They are deeply rational, drawing on a broader data set than conscious analysis can access. Psychologists who study decision-making have found that people who trust their intuition, particularly in complex situations, where not all variables can be consciously evaluated, often make better decisions than those who rely solely on rational analysis. This is not because intuition is infallible, but because it incorporates information that rational thought leaves out. And at night, intuition is louder, clearer, more insistent. It is as though the night strips away the intellectual justifications and excuses, leaving only the quiet truth of what you actually feel and know. The relationship between nighttime and intuition is also tied to the concept of felt sense, a term coined by psychologist Eugene Gendlin. Felt sense refers to the bodily awareness of meaning, the subtle physical sensations that accompany emotional truths. At night, when you are lying still and the environment is quiet, you become more attuned to your body. You notice the tension in your chest when you think about a certain situation. You feel the lightness that comes when you imagine a different path. These bodily signals are forms of intuitive knowledge, and they become much more noticeable in the stillness of night. There is also a cultural recognition of nighttime intuition. Many traditions speak of night as a time when the veil between conscious and unconscious is thin, when deeper truths can be accessed, when the soul speaks more clearly. While the language varies, the underlying observation is consistent. Night offers a different kind of knowing, a knowing that is not louder than logic, but quieter, and in its quietness, more trustworthy. As the night deepens and intuition makes itself known, you may find yourself trusting feelings you would have dismissed during the day. A sense that a relationship is ending, even if nothing dramatic has happened. A certainty that you need to make a change, even if you cannot yet articulate what that change should be. A quiet conviction that you are on the wrong path, or the right knee, despite all evidence to the contrary. These are not delusions. They are truths that your deeper mind has been holding, waiting for the moment when you are quiet enough to hear them. And the night, in its gentle illumination, ensures that moment arrives. And so the story continues its slow, inevitable drift toward a place of integration. As the hours deepen and the world grows even stiller, something begins to coalesce. A sense that all these elements, all these psychological shifts and neurochemical changes, are working together toward a single purpose. The night, with its darkness and silence and biochemical transformations, is not dismantling you. It is revealing you. It is stripping away the layers of performance and defense, and showing you the person who exists beneath them. And that person, for all their complexity and contradiction, is honest. The mind trusts itself more after dusk because it has less reason to lie. During the day, you are navigating a social world that rewards certain presentations of self and punishes others. You learn to emphasize the parts of yourself that are acceptable and hide the parts that are not. You learn to project confidence even when you feel uncertain, to display contentment even when you feel dissatisfied, to maintain composure even when you feel chaotic. These are not moral failings, they are survival strategies, but they come at a cost. The cost is a growing distance between who you are and who you present yourself to be. And that distance, over time, becomes painful. At night, that distance shrinks. The social pressures that demand performance fade away. The audience you were performing for is no longer watching. The roles you were playing no longer need to be maintained. You are alone in the dark, with only yourself for company. And in that solitude, the need to pretend dissolves. What remains is not a better version of you or a worse version. It is simply the real version. The version that feels what it feels, thinks what it thinks, wants what it wants, without apology or justification. And encountering that version, night after night, teaches you to trust it. This trust is hard one. Many people spend years learning to distrust their own feelings, to dismiss their own needs, to override their own instincts in favor of what others expect. But the night, in its quiet insistence, keeps bringing you back to yourself. It keeps reminding you that beneath the performance, beneath the defenses, there is a person who knows what is true. And that person, however much you may doubt them during the day, becomes undeniable at night. The emotions that surface are real. The thoughts that emerge are valid. The intuitions that speak are trustworthy. The night does not ask you to believe this. It simply presents the evidence, night after night, until you cannot deny it. Psychologists have studied the concept of authentic self, the version of you that exists when external pressures are removed. This self is not fixed or singular. It changes over time, shaped by experience and growth. But it is consistent in one important way. It is honest. It does not pretend to feel things it does not feel. It does not claim to want things it does not want. It does not perform emotions for the benefit of others. And nighttime, by removing the external pressures that usually distort self-perception, creates the conditions for this authentic self to emerge. The more often you encounter this self, the more you learn to trust it. And the more you trust it, the more honest your entire life becomes. There is also a neurological basis for this increased self-trust. The brain's default mode network, which becomes more active at night, is heavily involved in self-referential processing, thinking about yourself, understanding your own mental states, constructing a coherent sense of identity. When this network is active, you are not just thinking thoughts, you are thinking about the person who is thinking those thoughts. This meta-awareness creates a sense of continuity and authenticity. You recognize yourself in your thoughts. You feel aligned with your emotions. You trust that what you are experiencing is real, not a distortion created by external pressures or internal defenses. Circadian biology also plays a role. As you move through the 24-hour cycle, your brain passes through different phases of emotional openness and cognitive control. The nighttime phase is characterized by reduced control and increased openness, a combination that makes self-trust easier. During the day, the prefrontal cortex is constantly evaluating your thoughts and feelings, asking whether they are appropriate, logical, or useful. But at night, that evaluation weakens. Thoughts and feelings are simply allowed to be, without judgment, and in that allowance, you learn to trust them. You learn that your emotions are not threats to be managed, they are signals to be heard. You learn that your thoughts are not problems to be solved, they are expressions of who you are. The cumulative effect of these nightly encounters with your authentic self is profound. Over time, you develop a relationship with yourself that is based on honesty rather than performance. You learn to recognize what is true for you, even when it is uncomfortable or inconvenient. You learn to honor your needs, even when they conflict with expectations. You learn to trust your intuition, even when it defies logic. And this trust, built slowly over countless nights, becomes a foundation for a more honest waking life. The lessons you learn in the dark begin to influence the choices you make in the light. The honesty you practice at night begins to seep into your days. And slowly, the distance between who you are and who you present yourself to be begins to close. This is not a transformation that happens overnight. It is a process, unfolding across months and years of quiet nights. But it is a process that the night supports every single evening without fail. The darkness creates safety. The silence creates space. The biochemical shifts create openness. And together, these conditions allow you to become, gradually and gently, more honest with yourself. The night does not force this honesty. It simply makes it possible. And in making it possible, it offers you one of the most valuable gifts: the ability to trust yourself. To know that beneath the noise and performance and expectation, there is a person who is real, who is true, who is worth listening to. And that person, the night reminds you, has been there all along, waiting patiently for you to finally hear them. A soft closing now, like the final dimming of light before sleep, where all these threads weave together into something whole. We began tonight with a question: why do nights feel more honest? And through the slow unfolding of hours, we have found not a single answer, but a constellation of them. The night feels more honest because the world slows down, because the brain turns inward, because biochemistry shifts toward openness. It feels more honest because darkness conceals, because silence amplifies, because loneliness clarifies. It feels more honest because circadian rhythms modulate emotion, because the prefrontal cortex rests, because intuition speaks louder when logic quiets. Each of these reasons is true, and together they create an environment where honesty is not a choice you make, but a state you inhabit. There is a profound simplicity to this truth. Honesty, which can feel so difficult during the day, becomes effortless at night, not because you are trying harder, but because you are trying less. The armor you wore through daylight hours falls away. The masks you maintained dissolve. The defenses you built crumble. And what remains is you, unfiltered, unguarded, undeniably real. This is not weakness. This is the truest strength, the willingness to be vulnerable, even if only with yourself. The night teaches you something essential about what it means to be human. It teaches you that you are not just the person you present to the world. You are also the person who lies awake at midnight, feeling things you cannot name, thinking thoughts you cannot articulate, carrying truths you cannot yet speak. And that person, the one who emerges in darkness, is no less valid than the one who navigates daylight. In fact, they may be more valid because they are less mediated by performance and expectation. They are closer to the core of who you actually are. This is why the night, for all its vulnerability, can feel like a homecoming. It is the part of the day when you are most yourself, when the internal and external finally align, when what you feel and what you show are the same. And in that alignment, there is a kind of peace. Not the peace of resolution. The night does not solve your problems or answer your questions, but the peace of honesty, the peace of no longer hiding, even from yourself. As we drift toward the edge of sleep, where words begin to lose their shape and thoughts become softer, there is one final truth to hold. The honesty you encounter at night is not separate from the rest of your life. It is the foundation of it. Everything you learn about yourself in these quiet hours, every feeling you allow yourself to feel, every truth you acknowledge in the dark, becomes part of who you are. The night is not an escape from life. It is where life is integrated, where experiences are processed, where meaning is made, and where honesty, that most essential of human capacities, is given the space to flourish. So let the night hold you now. Let it wrap around you like a soft blanket, offering not answers, but presence. Let it remind you that honesty is not something you achieve, it is something you allow. And in allowing it, you become more whole. The day will return as it always does, with its brightness and noise and demands. But you will carry something from this night, a memory of what it feels like to be honest. Sense of the person you are when no one is watching. A trust in your own inner voice that was earned in darkness and will not be forgotten in light. The world outside your window is still. The hours are deep. And you, at the center of your own quiet existence, are exactly where you need to be. Not striving, not performing, not pretending, just being, just feeling, just knowing. The night has done its work. The honesty has arrived. And now, gently, inevitably, sleep waits just beyond the horizon of thought. Rest now. The truth will still be here in the morning.